We know that with rent rising the way it has, and with rent so expensive in our community right now, so many other people are in situations like this right now. And unfortunately, the pace of evictions may actually be coming even quicker than they were in the past. So not only are we seeing more evictions, but we're likely also seeing those evictions coming a lot quicker than they did previously. Right now we're heading to Taya Baez's apartment. I've been speaking to her for quite some time, I think a little bit over 2 months now that we've been kind of going back and forth, following up on her story. So we're going to be talking to her about the challenges she's faced as she's continued to make these, or try to make these rent payments. And she's hoping that she really can, find some way to figure out how she's going to make her next month payment and not face eviction. With that program. You said $1,000. Let me start by asking you, it seems like it's kind of been one thing after another the last few months. It's been a tough time for you. When do you think kind of the problem started?
I would say it started around my 25th week of pregnancy. That's when I started having gallbladder problems. I found out probably like less than a week later that I had level 3 precancer, and they couldn't do anything about it until after I had my son. And then about a week and a half after I had my son, I had to go into emergency surgery to get my gallbladder removed because my pancreas almost exploded and my liver was failing.
This is a woman who's done pretty much everything she can do, at least from her perspective, as she tells it. She's reached out to aid, she's reached out to church groups, she's tried to get a job and she's tried to hold down these jobs. But because of some of the medical conditions and medical problems she's dealing with, she's not really able to work. She told me that she has to skip meals. That was something that really surprised me. I didn't realize how dire her situation had gotten. It's hard to hear. What went through your head when you saw that 3-day notice on your door?
I cried. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I just went in there, I talked to you guys said it was okay, and now I'm getting a 3-day notice. I had no idea what I was gonna do. I genuinely thought in that moment that I was gonna lose everything, that my son was gonna lose everything, that we were gonna be homeless.
Do you think a 3-day notice is fair?
It's not fair. It's not fair at all.
Is it enough time to figure out what you gotta do?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I went in there and I've explained my condition, I've explained everything I've gone through. I've updated them every step of the way. I'm like, hey, I just got this new job. If I can't pay it this week, I'll pay it next week. I didn't have to do that, but I did. And she was like, okay, that's fine. Just try to pay it by the end of this week. And then not even 24 hours later, you give me a 3-day notice.
So many other people are in situations like Taya's. And so we're trying to understand, how big this problem is, how bad it's gotten, and what solutions are for people like Taya who are dealing with this right now. Next, we're speaking to Frank, and the reason why he's such a good person to speak to is because he's the kind of lead person on this group that brings together a bunch of regional partners that work with homelessness, housing, evictions, and foreclosures. So he's got a lot of insight, and I'm looking forward to learning where he sees this issue going and what he thinks some of the solutions can be moving forward. This is what I got from Orange County. It looks like, from what I'm reading and kind of the month-to-month, that 2022 is going to outpace all the way back to possibly...
By far, yeah.
All the way back to 2009,
yep.
Potentially.
Yep, very likely.
So what do you think is behind this increase that we're seeing right now?
So a couple things have happened. Our eviction moratorium that we had in various forms for about 18 months through the pandemic expired, so we no longer have that legal protection for tenants. We've seen dramatic increases in rent, right? Lots of reports of rent up 15%, 20%, as high as 30% or more. In a lot of cases, almost nobody's paycheck went up that much, right? So people are increasingly unable to afford these increases in rent. We're not seeing increases in housing supply, so if your rent went up $400 a month, there's nowhere out there for you to rent that's less expensive than what you're being offered now. And so this is all happening at the same time as these emergency rental assistance programs spending all the way through their money.
And so all of that is combining to create this situation where we're seeing so many more evictions filed.
So the 3-day notice is your landlord saying you're behind in rent, you need to catch up. You've got 3 days. After that 3-day notice happens, then they can file with the court and you'll get 5 days to respond to that legal complaint. And in Florida, in order to get a legal hearing, to get a court hearing, you'll have to put on deposit with the court the full amount of the back rent that's in dispute.
And he mentioned that it's problematic because if you're behind on your rent, you probably don't have the money to put up front to have a hearing in the first place. So I didn't realize there was kind of that catch-22 situation for individuals who get that eviction filing in the first place.
And then the sheriff shows up on your doorstep with an eviction notice, with a writ of possession that says you've got 24 hours to be out. At least anecdotally, I would agree that we're seeing more evictions filed more quickly, but we don't have any data to support that.
It was kind of impactful to hear from him that he believes the pace of evictions may actually be coming even quicker than they were in the past. So not only are we seeing more evictions, but we're likely also seeing those evictions coming a lot quicker than they did previously. So as a journalist, our job is to try and get in as many perspectives as possible when it comes to something like this. We're trying to understand what is happening with housing in our community, and in order to better understand that, we also want to be able to speak to the landlords. And so he connected us, or suggested we reach out to 2 different associations locally that represent apartment owners. And so we'll likely reach out to them and see if we can schedule an interview with them and get their perspective, include their perspective in our story.
So I'll just mute myself in between questions just to make sure that recording quality comes out okay.
So during that Zoom, we spoke with Chip Tatum with the Florida Apartment Association. He's the executive vice president for that association, and he has a lot of insight into what landlords, and some of the bigger landlords in particular, are dealing with both in Central Florida and then even wider across our state right now.
Well, I think it's important to note that first and foremost, evictions are a measure of last resort. In our opinion, the biggest factor is the diminishment of the ERA funds that were available. And I'm sure for a lot of Floridians that are still struggling, that carpet was kind of pulled out from underneath them when that federal funding ran out. There's a lot of different market scenarios going on right now, kind of all at once. These are things that you usually see in isolation.
But especially those high interest rates is something he mentioned as a difficulty for people who are looking to take that first plunge and buy their first home. They may not get the financing for it in the first place, which means more people are forced to rent in less units. So supply and demand continues to be an issue.
Sabrina?
Yes, hi sir, how are you doing? Nick Hellier is a landlord who has over 20 properties in Lake County, and he's still smaller in the grand scheme of things when it comes to these bigger LLCs. He had some really interesting perspective about what the obligations landlords are dealing with right now. So when you're talking about, the various obligations that landlords have, you just mentioned that you sometimes hear this narrative of landlords jacking up the price for seemingly no reason. That's not something you think is actually happening.
It might be happening in a very, very small minority of cases, but landlords are faced with very unprecedented expense increases. And like I say, if they only pass those on without adding a single dollar, that translates into about $250 a month for the average home in increased rent.
And then again, you said that's because of insurance and what else?
The primary 2 expenses that have gone into orbit are insurance and property taxes.
One of the things you also mentioned was that there's maybe a misconception about who landlords are. You said about 70% are smaller owners. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it's a very little known fact that more than 70% of all properties that are rented throughout the entire United States are owned by private landlords.
We did check this, and it looks like the U.S. Census Bureau has numbers from 2018 that show 70% of landlords, in fact, only own one rental property.
So they've got mortgages, they've got jobs, they've got all the usual expenses that all their tenants have got. So if they have a shortfall in rent all of a sudden, it doesn't take long for them to have all the same problems as their tenants have, which might include repossession notices from their mortgage companies. Evictions are so stressful for everybody involved. There's absolutely no upside for anybody. The expenses are enormous. The time it takes increases the stress between landlord and tenant. So everything that could possibly be done to avoid an eviction should be done. But I am optimistic, actually. The employment situation in Central Florida is very strong. Employers are having to pay more to find the employees that they need, which means that pay is higher. The government's increases in minimum wage have added 10% this year and probably about 9 or 10% next year. So I'm pretty optimistic that levels of evictions will go down in the near future.
So Nick had a different perspective from some of the other people we spoke to. Frank Wells, for example, told us he thinks that evictions, at least for some time, are going to continue to trend up. However, in the long run, Frank also agrees that this is part of the market restabilizing itself in the aftermath of COVID.
What's needed is a lot more work, a lot faster on making it possible to build at more affordable prices. Orange County is working on a task force to increase the pace of building housing supply. That's not an immediate solution for sure, right? That's going to take some time.
Nick Hellier and the FAA both gave some advice to tenants who are kind of realizing they may be short on rent, and that big piece of advice was to make sure you continue to communicate with your landlords. Both of them said if you communicate, there can be things to kind of prevent an eviction. Maybe they can find other revenue sources for you, introduce you to additional programs, or get you on a payment plan, but none of that can happen unless there is a conversation between that tenant and landlord. So that's an important piece of advice that they're giving to anyone who may be dealing with a situation similar to Taya.
It's not supposed to be this way. It's not fair, but it's life. Life's not fair. And I just gotta keep going for him and do what I have to do as a mom.
So in the month and a half since we spoke to Taya, we've had some difficulty getting back in contact with her. As we continued to report on this story, we realized we did want to check back in, and when we looped back in, we tried to call her, we tried to text her, and realized that that phone number is no longer in service. We've tried reaching out to her on social media as well, but have not been able to contact her directly there. And in looking at what may have happened to her, we had heard that she was behind on her utilities. She told us she was behind on her rent payments. It's very possible she may not have been able to make the payment on her phone bill. It got me thinking, what could she be dealing with right now? And I thought about our conversation and how she said she thinks she could be in a situation where she's evicted any day now. And so we checked the Orange County Clerk of Court's website and saw that she is in fact facing eviction. On October 6th, she got a second 3-day notice. She was not able to make the payment this time around, and that paperwork on file with the Clerk of Courts shows that she's gonna have to go to court and fight an eviction if she wants to stay in her place.
Hi, I'm Channel 9's Kirsten Delgado. Thank you for watching the WFTV YouTube page. Make sure you like and subscribe for up-to-date stories.